Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Joining me today is Thom Mahler, who is the Downtown Strategy Program Lead for the City of Calgary. Thanks for joining us today, Thom.
Thanks for having me, Mario.
Well, Thom, the city put out its State of the Downtown Calgary report this week. Before we get into the findings, can we talk a little bit about the why of this? Like, why was it necessary, or why did you think it was important to come up with a report about the state of the downtown?
Well, we started in Calgary to look at this because we were struggling with really understanding the whole context of how our downtown was changing. We obviously knew with the changing economy starting back in 2014, everybody was just hoping it was going to go back up. And when it didn't start going back up, we really started to dig into, well, what is going on? And we didn't have a lot of metrics. We had there's lots of data, but a lot of it was not defined around the downtown geographic area. We looked around what other cities were doing, and we found that in the United States, a lot of Americans do these state of downtown reports, because what it does is it gives investors and it gives businesses an understanding of what's actually happening within their downtown core. And if you're trying to lure somebody to invest them, the more information you give them, the better. So it really started from the standpoint of understanding what was going on in our downtown, and then doing it on an annual basis was important, because we want to be able to track if what we're doing is actually having an impact. And there's only one other city in Canada that does this. It's the City of London, Ontario, and they only do one every 2 years. So we're unique in Canada that we've started down this path, and it's starting to work for us because it forces us to really get the information about what's going on downtown.
So tell me, from your perspective, what were some of the key findings from the report?
Well, I mean, what we're finding of interest, we've divided the report into our pillars for our downtown strategy. And so we organized the data around our live pillar, which is around the quality of life within the downtown core from a residential standpoint, but also from an entertainment and hospitality standpoint. From a work perspective, this is all about business attraction and retention. Place, which is the investments in the public spaces, and what are we doing to build those public spaces? And the last one is on connection, and that's connectivity, and that's based on not only mobility and personal transportation, but also digital connectivity. So what we find in each of those categories is you start to paint a picture of where each of those are at. So I'll start with the work one. Calgary Economic Development is our lead in preparing that information. And right now, one thing we've learned is that data on numbers of employees is really difficult to get. So what we've started to do with the report is tell the stories about the companies and how business is changing. So right now, that section of the report is really about what we're trying to do, how we're trying to diversify the economy. Eventually, we'll start to get better numbers around numbers of employees. Our de facto, as everybody knows, is vacancy rate. Well, we know those are going up, but we're going to try and get better at telling the story in subsequent months and years about, well, what deals are being signed, what kind of companies are coming to downtown Calgary, and how many employees. So we're working with Calgary Economic Development on that. But I think on the live perspective, the interesting thing when you look at our numbers is, in spite of the danger zones of the office vacancy rate and what we're seeing there, residential's been a consistent performance, good performer for our downtown area. Really, since I'd say the mid-2000s, we've seen a regular increase in residential development within the greater downtown area, particularly in our Beltline, but also with the investment in East Village, we started to see it increase there. And there's a graph in there that shows the percentage of growth, residential growth downtown compared to the rest of the city. And it is really interesting to see that even in the downturn of the economy, our residential demand continues to be, it's not as high as it used to be, but I'd say it's stable for the most part, and we continue to see investment from residential developers in the downtown. So that's a big one. And then I'll talk about connectivity, because this is a really interesting one, because if you look at it from a travel to downtown perspective, we used to be heavily a peak time peak time sort of situation where everybody was coming in at the same time and leaving at the same time. And it was mostly on the trains and cars. And I think what we're finding now is there's a chart in the table, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but the mode share is really starting to change. Walking, cycling, and scooters is really starting to increase, and how people are moving around our downtown core, and it's less on the vehicle. Short term, it's also less on transit. I think people would not surprised by that. But with investments in Green Line in the future and the BRT, we have 2 new BRT lines that also intersect in the downtown. We'll start to see how that starts to change. We expect the vehicle coming back, but I think the other modes are the data tells us that the other modes are really where things are moving.
Okay, super. Safety, how important is that? And just even the perception of safety in the downtown to getting people to spend time down there?
Well, safety, we actually call the perception of safety, because you can look at crime numbers and incidents, incident reporting, but in our discussions with the Calgary Police, the numbers aren't as important as the perception. So we do a survey that talks about how do people feel downtown, and those numbers, it certainly has gone down. People feel less safe in the downtown in 2020 than they did in, say, 2015, and that's largely because of the pandemic, but it's also because of less activity in the downtown. So we are putting a huge focus on that. We have a downtown safety coordinator that the city has, and her job is to reach out and connect with all the other service providers on safety and security and mental health and addictions, because those things are all related. So over time, we intend to track that perceptions of safety. We get lots of information now when companies are trying to bring their employees back to the downtown core. Safety on the trains, safety walking around downtown is an issue, and it's something we will definitely be monitoring.
Okay, super. Just on a philosophical sense, I guess, in general, Thom, why is it important that cities have vibrant and entertaining and attractive downtowns? What is it? I know in society, we've tended to, over the last how many decades, moved outward, right, into the suburbs, et cetera. But why is it important to have a vibrant downtown?
Well, a lot of it's about quality of life, and it's about community pride. I think in Calgary particularly, everybody in Calgary loves their neighborhood. Everybody loves their quadrant. But when you go traveling, you don't really talk about your neighborhood or your quadrant. Or if you bring family in, everybody takes them downtown, and people want a sense of pride within their downtown area. It tells the story of our city, has most of our history in most cities, which is the case. That's where you find out about the history of the city and what its story is. And I think that's, at a philosophical level and at a human level, that's why it's important. It's where we connect with everybody in our community. So some of having the cultural facilities, the event centers, the major cultural institutions, those are all where we meet. And in Calgary, having the Stampede is being right in our downtown core, a huge part of how our community comes together on a regular basis.
Yeah. So Thom, just the last thing for you. So where do we go from here? You have the report now. What happens next?
Well, we're working continuously now we're calling it a 10-year strategy. Council's authorized up to $200 million for our first phase. But essentially, our goal is to invest $1 billion in our downtown over the next 10 years. And that will be with an intention of improving the quality of life, including improving its attraction to business. But it's also about attracting private sector investment. We're working closely with our real estate sector, particularly to make sure that our investments that the city makes is also reflected in investment in private sector. So that's really the strategy. The city is going to lead with investment in infrastructure and programming, and then we will look to and work with the private sector for them to reposition their assets and start to build new development as well.
Okay, super. Thanks, Thom, for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, super. That was Thom Mahler, who is the Downtown Strategy Program Lead for the City of Calgary. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business. Thanks for joining us today.